Okay. Okay. الفاتحة. Okay. All right. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Jazakallah khairan for having me come over. This is, alhamdulillah, it's a very exciting time for me. I started this Seerah project over 5.5 years ago. And along the way, I've had many friends just tell me it's good enough, put it out, but it wasn't, it didn't give the Prophet ﷺ and the Seerah its due right. And so alhamdulillah, this year we've had a lot of openings with it, and we reached a point now where alhamdulillah I'm finally pleased with it, and inshallah we're launching it now. We're taking orders online, and inshallah we pray that inshallah this will be something that will be immensely beneficial for the Muslim community, and in particular in our houses and with our children. So just to give you a backdrop of how this came about, I'm a designer by trade, and periodically I would go online and see what other designers are doing, try to get ideas, stuff like that. And one day I just, on one of the websites, they showed a project that someone, I think they did it here in London. It was a music company. They redid their office, I think Columbia, one of these things, and they made this historical timeline of all the artists that they signed, right? So it's like whatever, Beatles, Elvis, Run DMC, Jay-Z, whatever it was, right? And the idea I thought was nice, but it was like such a waste of your understanding of history and the purpose of mankind. And so it came to me, inshallah, maybe I could just do a Seerah like that, because I always wanted a Seerah artwork, but I never saw one that really, I really felt attracted me as a designer that I would want to put this up. So I said, inshallah, hopefully I could do this and have it finished in a month. And it took much longer than that. And so so that's kind of how the idea came about, because that's the question a lot of people ask me. And Assalamu alaikum. All right, so the idea was basically at first Seerah artwork. A lot of them are either for kids or just very general. So I wanted this at first to be an adult-based Seerah artwork, mainly built around typography, like using fonts and sizes, bold versus regular size, big size or small, just to bring energy out of it. And I didn't plan to have it be so full of images. But alhamdulillah, over the last 5.5 years, we went from 1 kid to 5 kids. And as this was progressing slowly, I've been able to see how my kids have been interacting with it and how they engage with it. And so over the last year or two, it's, a lot of changes have been made to try to make it more engaging for children. And it's a tough balance. So one of the things we were trying to do is try to make it something that's sophisticated enough for adults while still being engaging for kids, something that's has enough color to have interest, but not too colorful where it becomes either childish or it just doesn't match anyone's decor. It has to be a particular color, you know. And so there was a lot of time and energy spent on a lot of tiny details that if we didn't do that, it wouldn't have worked for many people. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to bring out many aspects of the Seerah that we think are essential for today's time. And so what we find is, unfortunately, nowadays, there's a lot of effort by non-Muslims to cause doubts amongst Muslims, in particular through the Seerah. So unfortunately, we have people who are very, for example, postmodernists. They create people who just cannot understand history. You know, like everything is some kind of struggle, women versus men. It was never about harmony between women and men. It's always about a struggle between women and men. And so it creates this kind of mindset where people cannot even read history properly. And so, for example, they look at the story of Sayyidah Aisha, or they look at Bani Qurayza, or they look at some of these things, and it's just it's just hard for many Muslims who aren't familiar with the Seerah, who only get a very like elementary kind of, the Prophet ﷺ was just beautiful and merciful at all times in all places, and they only show kind of the Jamali aspects of the Prophet ﷺ, never talk about the Jalali aspects. They never talk about some of these issues. Then people they wake up one day to go to an introductory college course with a teacher that hates Islam, and for the first time they're getting doubts about the religion. And so it's absolutely essential, I believe, that Muslims understand all the details, or all the main details about the Seerah. And so one thing we wanted to do is, many Seerah artworks I've seen as I traveled the world in different languages, English, Arabic, is they tend to have about 50, 100 bullet points, all at a small size, something that you can kind of ignore. It's not really chunked well into big moments versus small moments. So what we want to do is create something that every single day when you come into your house, you could just look at one particular area and just take that in for a minute or two. And maybe the next day it's something else. Maybe you go to the khutbah and you hear something about Badr. Or you go to a lecture and they're talking about prophecies of the Prophet ﷺ in the Bible. And so that at any aspect, any khutbah, any talk that's related to the Prophet ﷺ, you could come back home and you'll find something here that kind of connects with that. And so in order to do that, we had to kind of bring out the main ways Seerah is taught. And so there's many things to look at when you're looking at the Seerah, right? So you have, for example, just the general events, right? And so what we wanted to do with the main events is, you see in big bold letters, Isra wa Miraj, Badr. This is something, if you only look at the big letters, these are things that Muslims who aren't too familiar with the religion would probably know about them, right? People didn't come necessarily from religious families, didn't have a religious upbringing, but they would know Iqra. They would know the story about that, right? They would know the story that Muslims were persecuted, they would know Isra wa Miraj, the Hijrah, stuff like this. And so this is something, so when you walk into a room, you'll see the big headlines, and you can take that in within a few seconds. But what we wanted to do is then bring out the tertiary, the secondary, tertiary, all these other kind of things, so that as you move closer to it, more and more reveals itself. And that's the nature of all types of knowledge, right? First you just study an introductory book and you get a very general overview, but as you get closer and closer and spend more time with it, more reveals itself. So we wanted to bring that aspect out. Another thing we want to do is, with the Seerah, there's many ways to kind of look at it. So one point of view is to look at it from a revelation perspective, that the Quran was sent at various points through the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah chose the Prophet ﷺ and his life and his events to coincide with revelation, right? And so it's really important to understand that his life is in a way very sacred because it's connected to the Quran. And this is something that only Muslims have. If you look at the Old Testament, New Testament, people just don't know when things came down. They don't even know the general century for many of these things, let alone this particular event. But alhamdulillah, Allah has given us that. And so I felt it's very important to do that. So what we did is, for all the major events, so I'm not sure if you can see here. So for example, Badr, right here, we talk about the number of Muslims and the angels that came and helped the Muslims. And then we mentioned the ayats, Surah 8, verses 15 to 16. So you can look at this, and then you could pick up the Mus'haf, and you could read. You could see which ayats came down at this time. And so when we first started it, that was one of our main focuses. We wanted you to take this artwork, but also that it could be something of a reference material, that you could actually go through it. And then once we did that, that was like maybe a year into it or so, we saw that we had roughly 1,000 or so ayats of Quran in the artwork. Some of them were directly here. Other things were like, say, the year of the elephant. We mentioned Surah Al-Fil, even though it's about that, it wasn't revealed during that time, but most of them. And so then the idea came, what if we put all the ayats of Quran? We already have like a fifth of it already here. But that wasn't an essential thing. So what we wound up doing is we created, throughout the thing, each column, is for things that didn't directly relate to what's mentioned in the artwork. We just mentioned these are the verses that were revealed at this time. And we break it down by subject. So for example here, we'll say, where is this? For perished nations, the call, Abraham, creation, scripture. So we still made it thematic so that you could actually look at it and say, oh, what is this about? What is this about? So it's these are kind of nice activities you could even give your kids. Have them go through the whole Quran in the according to the Asbab al-Nuzul, according to the time it was revealed, and try to make sense of why this was revealed during this period, right? And then some things become very important. So, for example, we know the journey of Ta'if was a very difficult time. It was the Prophet ﷺ said it was the worst time of his life, the most difficult. And so, right after that happened, soon after came the story of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was revealed. وَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. So it's really important that we understand these things came at this time for a particular purpose, right? So the Prophet ﷺ just lost his wife, his uncle. The Muslims going through a very difficult time. But then we have to see that Sayyidina Yusuf was separated, and he went through a great difficulty, but he was patient. And so it was a story for the Muslims at the time. And so we wanted to bring that aspect, and we wanted very much to be understanding of how the Seerah related to the Quran and how the Quran related to the Seerah, so that we could, as ourselves, tie this together. Another thing we wanted to do is talk about the people who were affected by the Prophet ﷺ. So one of the proofs of the Prophet ﷺ is the Sahaba. Who were they, and what happened to them during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and what after it. So we have throughout this, we will mention many Sahabas throughout. So for example, the battle begins. Hamza, Ubaidah and Ali versus Utbah, Walid and Shayba, right? And so all throughout, once you go through the whole artwork, you'll see there's just over 100 Sahaba that are mentioned here. And you can see the greatness of the people that the Prophet ﷺ taught, you know? And so that's another aspect of the Seerah that we wanted to bring out. So what else? Then another thing that's not mentioned much is, when you're going through Seerah, is what was happening. So a lot of it's front and center, right? Badr, you talk about Uhud, you talk about Sayyidina Hamza, you talk about all these wars, and a lot of old Seerah books are based on this. But what was happening in their lives? So for example, the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ, you don't really hear that mentioned much. His wives, other female Sahaba. So we'll mention a lot of small details here and there, like, so for example, Ta'if. People will talk about Ta'if. But what was the experience of the family of the Prophet ﷺ who had just lost Khadija and Abu Talib? He came back from Ta'if, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, bruised and bloodied. What was it like for his daughters to see that? And so we actually mentioned that. You know, we mentioned when he was going around from tribe to tribe, trying to get people who will take the Muslims in, and it was rejected and rejected. You know, what did they see as that was going on? You know, so for example, it's mentioned that Zainab, when she saw that, she actually saw people rejecting the Prophet ﷺ. It broke her heart, and she started crying. And so these are things. It's really important that we actually see that part of the Prophet ﷺ's life. So we have that. Then we have a lot of small vignettes as well, because many times Seerah could just only be about the Prophet ﷺ. So here we have, for example, the Prophet ﷺ joking with others. The most famous ones probably of the old lady who said, you know, will I go to Jannah? He said, old women are not allowed in Jannah. Or they don't enter Jannah, right? And then of the man who wanted a camel, he was exhausted. So we mentioned a lot of these kind of stories to bring out the beauty of it. We mentioned important adhkar. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, we have more du'as from the Prophet ﷺ than of all the prophets combined, probably 100-fold more. What kind of du'as does Jesus make, alayhi salam, or Moses, or anyone else? They have no idea. But we have that preserved. So we have, for example, the tasbih Fatima that he gave her when she wanted some help in her house. You know, we have throughout like important adhkar from the Quran. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. Let's see what else. We have Allahu Akbar. We have a lot of these different things, La ilaha illallah, so that it's also a reminder for us to actually make these adhkar, to remember these things, because that was one of the main points of his life, was to actually bring about the commands of Allah, to remember Allah, and to make much remembrance of Allah. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring all these different parts of the seerah and bring them together. And then so I mentioned as this was going on, my kids started engaging with it. When I first started, my oldest was just about a year old, and my wife was pregnant with the second. But then by the second, third year, there was 2 of them, then 3. And we started playing these games where we would be like, okay, where is the hijrah? And so in the beginning, we had a few things. We had like an Iqra calligraphy piece. In the hijrah, I'm not sure if you can see right here, but we actually have like a spider web, as if this is the cave. We had the Isra wa Miraj. We had a few of these things, and I saw they were just pulled to these. And what they were doing, they were kind of making a visual timeline in their head that they could grow up with. So if you say Badr, they know it's here. If you say Uhud, they know it's here. And they could kind of piece it together. And so, for example, my daughter Maryam, she could, she's 3 years old almost? Sorry, losing track. So she's 3.5. And so from around the age of 2 or so, she could barely say like 5-10 words, right? But she was able to point out like 20-30 different things here. And so I felt like seeing that, much of this last year was put into making it more engaging for little kids. And so in every column we have tons of little things. So there's always at every point some kind of visual marker or several visual markers that they could point to. Another thing we did with the visuals is, for example, what we see is in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, in ancient times, people were very connected with the world around them. The seasons, the planets, the mountains, rivers. And so, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said about Uhud, Uhudun Jabal yuhibbuna wa nuhibbu. So that Uhud is the mountain that actually loves us, and we love it. There's a deep connection that the Prophet ﷺ had with the world around him. Rocks used to praise him before prophethood, right? Stones used to praise him. And so what we did is we make sure to add many kind of these visual markers. So for example, this first column is all about the things that happened before the life of Prophet ﷺ, but that relates to the Seerah, right? And so we have things like, and this whole column is kind of building up. Why was the Prophet ﷺ sent when there was already previous prophets before him? How do they connect with each other? And this column is kind of very focused on dawah. So we actually, when we talk about the prophets, we use their names in the Western spelling. So we'll say Abraham, Jesus, stuff like this. And so here it is, Safa and Marwa. Here's Musa alayhi salam, Mount Sinai. And so it's this kind of helping people remember that there is some kind of deep connection between the prophets and their message and the land which we live on. And so you will find a lot of things like that. And so my kids just love these things, Jabal Nur with the light coming out of it. Mount Sinai, there's a little fire there, and they'll remember that, right? They'll remember that as a visual marker. So we have a lot of that going on. And then what we do is we also have, so actually let me go into this. So with this column, one of the things we want to do for dawah purposes is as soon as they look, people in the English world, people in the Western world, whenever they take in something, they start in top left visually. Whereas in the scripts where people right to left, they tend to look here first. And so we wanted to put right here, right in the top left, things about biblical references. But we use things that talk about the Prophet ﷺ. So right here in the beginning is Hajar giving birth to Ismail. And something that I didn't realize the extent of it was these two things are references from Genesis, the first book in the Old Testament. And in it, Allah's telling Hajar and Sayyidina Ibrahim about Ismail. And he's making a promise. And so, for example, in one ayat it says, "As for Ismail, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and greatly increase his number. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." And then later on, when Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam leaves her in Mecca, and this story is still in the Old Testament, said, "God has heard Ismail's cry, and the angel of God called to Hajar from heaven. What is the matter, Hajar? Fear not, for God has heard the boy's cry in the plight of his. Arise, lift up the boy, for I will make him into a great nation. And actually make that slightly gold right here. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. God was with the lad. He lived in the wilderness of Paran. And so what's really interesting about these, and I actually highlighted these, I have other biblical references, but I actually highlight these in a kind of Torah parchment paper, is when you look at all the commentaries that Jews and Christians have written, and I actually did a bit of research into this, and you could, in all the commentaries, as they go line by line by line, you could find 20, 30 different commentaries of every single verse where they go in deep detail about what these things mean. And then you get to these two ayats, and they just go quiet. They don't stop and reflect. What does it mean that God's going to make a great nation out of Ismail alayhi salam? You know? Like, what is it? We know it wasn't the Jahiliyyah time, right? It wasn't Arab men burying their baby daughters alive. That's not a great nation to Allah, right? But what was it that made it great to Sayyidina Ibrahim, the break of idols? What great thing came out of Sayyidina Ismail that was like Ibrahim alayhi salam? And all the commentaries just go blank. They just move on to the next ayat, to the next verse. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about these things. And so these are things for Muslims to also understand for dawah purposes, you know. And then we start talking here about Dawood and Sayyidina Sulaiman, because this is also, for some odd reason, this is causing a lot of doubts in Muslims. That why did the Prophet ﷺ, if he was a prophet, why was he fighting wars? You know, and you see this in some websites, some non-Muslims, and they have this weird understanding because of they view Jesus as alayhi salam as someone who never fought, and this should be the ideal in their mind, ignoring the whole last book of the Bible that talks about all the wars that Jesus is going to fight at the end of times. But to them, a prophet should be someone who is only peaceful, and they don't understand how can we view the Prophet ﷺ as someone who was a warrior. And so there's something, actually I sat down once with I shouldn't say his name, but someone who's engaged in interfaith work, and he mentioned this, that it's quite hypocritical that they would say something like this to us, and they open up the Testament and they see bloody wars that these old prophets fought, Dawood, Sulaiman, Joshua, and many of these other prophets. And so there's something that we should feel we should be very confident when we talk about these things, that a prophet fighting wars, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, why is it fine for a U.S. army to go halfway to Europe to fight a big bloody world war, but somehow prophets shouldn't? You know, and then so over here we go into more prophecies. So here in the Songs of Solomon, his mouth, which could be read also as speech, is full of sweetness. He is the great Muhammad. So in Hebrew, till this day, it says Muhammadim, with the I am as something used for exaltation. So for example, when they talk about God, they say Elohim, right? So it means the great Muhammad. This is my beloved, this is my friend's daughter of Jerusalem. So these are things we need to understand. These are still in the Old Testament, you know. And then Isaiah has several prophecies about Isa alayhi salam, but also about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So right now, when you open up the Old Testament, it says right now, the book is revealed, is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot read. So what do they say? Oh, that's just an allegory. That's not about a future event, even though it lines up perfectly with this event, right? And so they tried as best they can to try to describe these things away. But the moment there's anything that has any kind of connection with Jesus, they'll quickly say that's about him. But when there's something literally about the Prophet ﷺ describing an event in his life, they just want to ignore that and just say, no, that's just some kind of allegory that has no real meaning. And so, but it's very important, because these are kind of things that when we're raising kids here, there's always times when people in teenage years, when they're going through all types of different things, that they have things that they could hold on to. And so one of these things are these prophecies that, look, whatever everyone else says, he's there and he's praised there. And don't listen to this waswasa of the shaitan. This is, you know this true, they know it's true. And we have several things here that are specifically designed to kind of raise the iman of people who are maybe going through some kind of weak stage. So on the opposite side of the artwork, after the Prophet ﷺ passes away, we go through stages where what happens immediately after he passes away. So Abu Bakr becomes the caliph, right? And then we talk about generations after. Then we talk about the signs of the final days that have already come about. And so this clear hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says there'll come a time where there'll be dishes that are in constant communication with each other. Now, if you try to put yourself back into, 1,400 years ago in a Bedouin tent in a tiny little town, and someone says dishes will be talking to each other, like, no one could imagine something like this. Like, what could this mean? And so these are things that it's important that we teach our kids these things, these kind of things that if something ever happens, and we have to be honest, we have to also see that we don't know when death is coming, right? We could die, You and your spouse can pass away. What have you left your kids if that event happened? Now, may Allah protect us all, but these kind of things, they happen. And it's very important that we plant these seeds as early as possible. And so this whole thing is meant to be like that. And then these things are a lot of these are kind of straightforward, right? So we have the section on the household, the birth. So what I would like to do is kind of highlight some of these things we've done to try to make it a little bit more engaging for kids. So let me get a volunteer. Come here. Assalamu alaikum. What is your name?
Hamza.
Hamza, how old are you?
7.
7. Okay, I want you to read this. Do you know how?
Every idol fell on its face.
What happened here? What happened with those letters?
They were upside down.
They fell upside down, right? I don't know if everyone could see this, but we actually have the letters in face. As you're reading, you could actually see the last letter falls down directly on its face. Do you know what is feel in Arabic? No? Who knows what feel is in Arabic? Elephant. Okay, so here, when we talk about the year of the elephant, come here. Do you see some letters are lighter than others?
Yes.
Which letters?
The light green.
Yeah, the light green. What's this one? F?
E.
Mm-hmm.
E. L.
F-E-E-L. What does that spell?
Feel.
Feel. Good job. MashaAllah. So what we do is we have a lot of these kind of little subtle things throughout where they could actually engage with the artwork. You could play games with them. So for example, here we have some other things. So in the noble lineage, we know the story of his father that on the day of his marriage to Amina, there was a lady of Quraysh who proposed to him and said, take me now. She saw this nur on his face. And then when he saw her again later on, she was totally disinterested in him. And he asked her why. She said, because I saw a nur in your face and it's gone, right? And so within the word noble, we have in light blue nur. Because they say there was a nur from Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam all the way to his father that would kept passing generation to generation to generation. What do we have here? Oh, come again, Hamza. I'm going to use you a lot. Do you mind?
Yeah.
You do mind. Okay, so what does this say?
1000 BC.
Uh-huh.
David
Slays.
Goliath.
Goliath. Do you know what this is? This why?
A tree.
Almost. It's a slingshot. So David, Dawood alayhi salam, they said David slaughtered Goliath with just a rock. And they have this thing called slingshot. You go like this and you shoot and it goes psh. And so what we did is we made this Y look like a slingshot. And so we have all throughout. We probably have like 50 of these kind of little things all throughout that you can use to actually engage your kids. So when you look at this, Iqra, this says Iqra. Do you see a particular shape overall? What does that kind of look like?
It looks like a oval.
Uh-huh. And what do you see the shape like this, that comes like that? Does anyone know? Oh, maybe this is this. Here, come here. The shape here of this calligraphy says Iqra. What does that kind of look like? Oh, actually, that's pretty good. This actually does look like the Qudsi. But it has like a vessel. It looks almost like a water vessel. So this is our vessel of knowledge that we drink from. But also within it, here in the middle, it kind of almost looks like a sandal. This shape here. There's a blessed sandal. I'm sure everyone familiar with that? The sandal of the Prophet ﷺ. Because we know that Aisha mentioned about him that he's like a Quran walking on the earth. Like he's a walking Quran. And so what we want to do is we wanted to talk about this event of Iqra, but we also want to remember that his life, ﷺ, is an example of what it would be like if you completely followed the Quran and lived your life by the Quran. So I don't want this to go on too long, but so come here, let's do this. What does this look like?
Looks like a keyhole.
A keyhole. And this? Or maybe you haven't seen those. Those are quite old. Those are old, how old keys used to look like. The old keys, they used to have like these little, what do you call them? Those things that come out of the key, whatever. So this is the head of the key. And so in the opening of Mecca, within this, we actually do several things. So to play around with the opening idea, we have this key and a key lock. Maybe so the camera's down. And so we have this key and a key lock. At the same time, because Islam is clearly now on the rise, this is at this point, it's like words getting out everywhere. And so in the G, we kind of make it look like an arrow that after going through a tough time, Islam is now going forward upwards. Another thing we did is this kind of font. It was like a stencil kind of font. They use it a lot in like army to spray paint letters. Usually when you see it, it's usually like gritty, like things over here, but we didn't do that. We made it very clean to indicate that this was a very clean victory, right? And then right in the middle, in the Mecca itself, we put a V for victory. And so throughout all of these, so here, let's see who can see what's in this letter R. Look at the letter R carefully. What do you see within the letter R? Focus on the white. Oh, you might want to get closer. I'm sorry.
A flag?
A flag. So the Muslims at Badr, their flag was a white flag. And so within the letter R, I don't know if everyone can see that, but it's as if the Muslims had planted the victory flag. And so we have a lot of these things all throughout because we want to make it fun and engaging. You can kind of play these games with the kids, get them involved. They could actually remember this. Like, I never remembered before what was the color flag of Badr, until I started working on this and putting it together. And so what we want to do is try to make it as engaging as possible, as informative as possible, make these things where you can kind of connect all these different events. And so I don't want to drag it on too long. But so what I'll do is maybe we'll just stop for questioning. Okay, so what we're doing now, because this is so detailed, what we plan to do, this is the first product. What we want to do is actually then create a kind of a booklet, like a coffee table booklet that you can keep with it. So if someone comes over your house, this is up on the wall, they could have the booklet that they don't have to go right up close and actually get to it. So inshallah, we're working on that right now. The goal is also, inshallah, to create an app of this. So at any point you could look at it and you could click and it'll have some like brief lessons or very motivating talks about this event that we found. So inshallah, that's one of the next things. We want to actually make a free app for this. That at any time you could point at Hijrah and learn, okay, what does this line mean? What does this line mean? We want to make activity books, inshallah, for kids. So what we want to do is actually make a whole separate company dedicated to Seerah resources so that we can learn how to best bring the Seerah into the lives of our kids and into the families and also, inshallah, communities. But inshallah, it's one thing at a time. So this we're just launching now. We're gonna inshallah have future things on the way. Inshallah, we've already started working on a few things, and inshallah, with your du'as, inshallah, we could actually complete this, inshallah. So we'll just open up for questions. Anyone?
Do you have any book with the references, like if we want to go into detail?
Okay, so actually, what I did with this is, for the first, say, 3.5 or 4 years of this, I didn't read books of Seerah. All I was doing was listening to all these different series of Seerah lessons by various scholars in English, because I wanted that option. I wanted to. There's a certain feeling when a sheikh is teaching the Seerah and you're sitting there, and it's not about like what will some editor say about it, what will someone, what will be, are there any grammar mistakes, any of this. It's meant to be, this is how Seerah has always been taught. It's strictly about instilling love into the next generation. And so most of this, 90% of this was done just listening to these audios, and there's tons and tons of beautiful Seerah related audios that are available on YouTube. You could purchase them. So for example, I was just at the Virtue Store with Sheikh Ibrahim Osifa. So his Seerah lessons, which are available on YouTube, were one of the first ones I went to, and he highlights a lot of these things I mentioned are his things. And so it's just trying to bring out that feeling when someone's really getting into the Seerah and they're talking about it, that you can also get that feeling. But then in the last year, so I've read a few just to make sure things are in the right place. I spell things properly. So Martin Ling's, there's actually a lot of recent Seerah and Shamal kind of books have been published recently. And so, but definitely there's tons of beautiful lectures online. And so this is probably from like 20 or 30 different scholars, like their Seerah lessons. Sometimes it's a whole complete series. Sometimes it's just they're talking about one particular thing, Isra wa Miraj, or they're talking about the Hijrah or something like that.
Okay.
Wait.
Is it available in one size only, or?
Right now it's available in 2 sizes. So this is the standard size. Then there's a bigger size, which is available now as well. So this is, in centimeters, it's 140 by 100, which is a standard IKEA frame size. So this is actually an IKEA frame that this is on. So we want to make it affordable. So I think, I'm not sure how much it is here, maybe 30 quid, or something like that. You could go to IKEA and get it. Because otherwise, it'll be expensive in the frame shop. So you could also get it go and get it framed and stuff, but we wanted to make it affordable. The next one would be more maybe for masjids or schools or Muslims in America, which would be like the 2 meter. It'll be like 2 meters by 140, and so that'll be very big, easy to read. And inshallah, within the next maybe 2 months, we plan to make a smaller version, the UK version, I guess. That's a common thing I've heard from a lot of British Muslims. I have no space in my house.
A3 size.
Squeeze it into a little business card. But then it'll be something like 100 by 70 is the goal, which is also a standard frame size. So just try to make it affordable. But that would be a poster, not a canvas. So this is a canvas, a cloth canvas. It's printed with natural pigment inks. So that it's natural pigments are similar to what the paints that painters will use. The colors don't fade quickly like synthetic inks do. So they say about 100 years or so. So the golds will look bright gold for a long time. The reds will look red for a long time. So.
Yeah, I mean, part of my question was answered, but also where we can find more information about and how we can follow you,
Yes.
Making updates and all that.
Sure.
And things like that.
Sure.
And you talked about the booklet, so I think do you have a website or where you can follow it or
Okay.
things like that, and that you can talk about.
Sure. So we have, for updates, the best thing is Instagram. We have our Instagram account is Seerah Life, Seerah Life, Life. The website, inshallah, we'll finish it. It should be up within a week. And that's called, actually, it's www.seerah.life. So .life is a new domain extension. Instead of .com or .co.uk, you could get .life now. So this will be Seerah.life. And so, inshallah, that's coming up. We have it available on Irada Arts website, this size. So you can go to it. Double E-R-A-H. I guess.
You note it down or something on the
Oh, yes. Yes.
We can just all get a picture or something.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Questions?
How many people did the research? Was it just yourself only, and like in terms of combination?
Yeah, so it's been mainly me, the writing, the design. I've had a few people go through it and just make sure everything's fine, no mistakes. But the main thing, like a lot of these are very basic things that we've heard about, right? They're not like, even though it looks quite big, if this was put into a book form, it would probably be like a 15-page book, a very small booklet. And so, but yeah, alhamdulillah. So I did most of the writing and the quote unquote research, but it's been edited. A few people, 3 people have gone through it, and inshallah, we're just checking it, doing some. We did some last checks for spelling mistakes, stuff like that. But alhamdulillah, so we've gone through that, so it's ready now. Yeah. Jazakallah khairan. Jazakallah. Barakallahu fikum.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I echo the other person's sentiment. Really revolutionary. Do you have any plans in the pipeline for like stories of the other prophets?
Yeah. So alhamdulillah. So a lot of the time it was spent in trying to just make it work. Like, what is the way to make it work visually? Because before, like even a year ago, it was less colorful. There was much space. It was very unbalanced, really. Oh yeah, and actually just a week ago, what we actually had, not a week ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we actually had text going all around that would mention things like, some hadith describing the Prophet ﷺ, a lot of short hadith, names of the Prophet ﷺ. But what happened was, over the time, as we added more space and tried to make it easier to read, all the text just became smaller and smaller and smaller. And so it got to the point where it was just getting too difficult to read up close. And so after this, alhamdulillah, we prayed istikhara, and we found that by removing all the text around it, we were then able to stretch all the text out so that all the main text could be easy to read. And so there was just a lot of these things that just came in the last year on the design that it bothered us from the very beginning. This just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like the design is giving the seerah its proper due. So I mentioned that because hopefully going forward, now that we kind of figured out visually how to do this, hopefully we could do one on the lives of the other prophets and not take 5.5 years, So hopefully we could do stuff like that. There's a lot of suggestions we've received. So the Khulafa Rashideen, like say for example the mothers of believers. So there's many things we could do. The life of Sheikh Muhammad Qazi. No.
I figured that, mashallah, if you put thought into every element, every letter. I was wondering how you chose the typography and the title, and the design for the title of the poster.
Okay. So for the typography, we were going for kind of early on. It was a very kind of Victorian typography. So Victorian era was like this mushrooming of I'm going to bore you a little bit with design stuff, but it was like this mushroom, like this big explosion of new types of fonts, especially with the development of newspapers and marketing. So up until like the late I don't know exactly, say 1860s, 70s, there was no such thing as bold. There was never a bold letter in any books. Everything was just Roman. It was like a Garamond. It was like just clean, and then eventually italic. But during the Victorian era, that's when people started realizing, okay, people started making flyers, advertising flyers. And they said, okay, we need this to stand out more. So they created bold. They created sans serif fonts. So sans serif fonts are like this. It doesn't have like these little spurs at the end, like say this does. So that developed at the same time. Lots of new forms of letters came all around that same time. But there was still overall this idea of making things condensed, which are very important in newspapers, that if you want a big headline, you have to design letters a certain way. And so most of these fonts, they come from that kind of Victorian spirit. So we could go between things that are like very elegant. So the Birth, this font, Excel, it has a slight calligraphic feel to it, very subtle, but it's there. And then we could go to kind of big, bold fonts like Uhud, like things that, but there's overall within them, there's a harmony between the letters. So that's kind of the idea behind the fonts. There's a few exceptions. So I'm not sure if you can see it here, but wherever we mention the hypocrites, so like this, for example, hypocrites in Medina, we have what we call inline, where there's a white space within the letter. And so that's to kind of indicate that outwardly, they were trying to be Muslims, inwardly they were empty souls, right? And so anytime any of the hypocrites are mentioned, we use that. And the shape of it, we don't give it that kind of Victorian thing. We use a more modern shaped font. But other than those, for the most part, all of these have that kind of typography. There was a second question? Oh, the title. Yeah, title, we went through many titles. Really? Yeah, and nothing really clicked until we got to this. Because it was a kind of newspaper feel. Yeah. So first someone mentioned CD, a friend of ours, Saifullah. He recommended The Life and Times of Abu Zahra. But we tried that, we put it in English. And then while we were going to a coffee shop, we opened it to a local Jordanian, and he looked at he's like, what's Abu Zahra? Like he just didn't understand what that even referred to. And so after looking around for it, then eventually we came to this, Life and Times of the Prophet, because then before it was just the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is also the name of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's CD series on the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But something about it just felt too generic. And then what was happening over the years is about a year ago we first added this medallion, but it was very small. We worked to keep increasing it based on, there's a very influential architect from the U.S., Christopher Alexander, who's done a lot of studies on what are the principles behind traditional beauty in architecture. Like, why is the Taj Mahal so beautiful? Why is Alhambra so beautiful? And he used a lot of references from Muslim things. And so he eventually, over years of study, he developed several theories about this. And his main theory is beauty is based on the amount of life in something, right? And so it's actually it's quite profound. Is that if something doesn't radiate life, then it can't be beautiful. If it's not giving life to others, it's not beautiful. And the opposite. And it reminds us of the hadith, right? The comparison between someone who remembers Allah and the one who doesn't is like the living versus the dead, right? And so and from that he has like these 15 principles of what makes something beautiful. One of which is a central void. So when you walk into a masjid, he gives examples from masjids that there's classical eras. There was this big empty courtyard where you could just empty yourself out, and then you walk into the prayer hall and there's a mihrab, and right in the middle of the mihrab it just becomes empty. And then you look down on the prayer rugs, and it's decorated all around, but right in the middle, they tend to be empty. And so he said this is it's something that's found in nature a lot too. And so he uses examples from nature, but he also uses quite a bit of examples from Islamic art and architecture. And so we realized that because there was so much busyness, we needed a place where you could just kind of empty yourself out, right? And that was the name of the Prophet ﷺ. So it took us a long time to kind of fit everything together where we could actually make this big. And then one of the good things about it is you could actually kind of read it, the life and times of the Prophet Muhammad. Like that's how the eye will flow. But at the same time, we wanted this, the Prophet, because that's one of the prophecies of the Prophet ﷺ in the Old Testament. That when they came to Yahya alayhi salam, John the Baptist, they were expecting 3 more prophets to come. So they were expecting Yahya alayhi salam, Jesus alayhi salam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so when they asked him, "Are you Elijah?" He said no. And Elijah just means someone who takes on that kind of role of Elias alayhi salam. And he actually did all his work on the mount of Elijah, which is in Jordan, right near the baptism site of Jesus. So, and then they said, "Are you the Messiah?" Right? And he said no. Then they said, "Are you the prophet?" And he said no. And this is also found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which we mentioned as well. It's very clear in the Dead Sea Scrolls that they were, at that point, they were expecting 2. A messianic figure and a kingly figure. And it's very clear throughout that there were 2 more that they were expecting of 2 main prophets. And so that we also wanted to make the prophet there for dawah purposes. So it's nice because you can read it both ways. Muslims immediately will see the life and times of the Prophet Muhammad. And then non-Muslims, we wanted to be like, okay, who is this? Who is this, the prophet that you're talking about? So, alhamdulillah, that's how it came about.
Each piece of the event that happened in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like an individual piece of artwork. So can we? Are you gonna include that in a booklet, or can we get it through online? Like because as you mentioned, somebody who's coming, it might be a bit. They don't particularly have to go and look at individual events. So you're gonna have this
yes.
Like.
So inshallah, there's a few plans with the book. So the current layout, how it is we're going to take every column and split into like about 3 to 5 pages. So this one page might just be this. The second page might be this section. Then like that and so on. And then, so the first booklet we'll do is just a booklet just so that you could look at it and read it easily. So everything's bigger and it's easy on the eye. And then the goal for in the future is to create workbooks and textbooks where there's commentary on all these different parts of the Seerah. And so that will probably be take a while because writing is actually much harder because you actually have to worry about like sentences and the flow. Here I'm just trying to worry on brevity, like a headline, the believers persecuted, almost like a newspaper. So that will take some time. We've already spoken to several scholars who are interested. And so, but I don't want to give like a short timeline and everyone's like, well, a year later, where is it? So, but the goal is, inshallah, we're going to have several things going on with this. Several types of books. So, inshallah, just make dua. But we feel like the idea is kind of like this will be like a kind of ecosystem or platform where you can learn almost everything you need to learn about the Prophet ﷺ from the time you're a year and a half until the time you're an adult. And so we want to have age-related resources. So for kids, more playful, more activities, arts and crafts related to it. And then for adults, more intellectual things. So inshallah.
Covering everything. So would you also consider like this particular incident, like for example Hijrah?
Yeah.
Like that poster in large.
Sure.
Just that poster hanging, for example, in your living room or
Yes.
in your corridor, and it's just the Hijrah, or it's maybe just the trenches or the brother.
Sure.
Large one.
Yeah, so he asked about making each different section different artworks, and that's something actually we are looking into, because there's a lot of editing. There's a lot of things we even wanted to say that we weren't able to. So the Isra and Miraj is just rich with a lot of details, right? The farewell pilgrimage, we hardly touched it, right? We mentioned there's a very brief summary of the farewell sermon, just some key lines that we felt were important, but it's not the full farewell sermon. So we would like to actually have artworks dedicated to this, and offer the ability for measures in schools and even people's houses to customize it. So if someone says, okay, we have this wall space 3 meters wide by, 2 meters tall, can you customize this for us? And so then we could look at it and we could say, okay, inshallah, we could come up with something, whether it's a canvas, poster, wallpaper, or whatever it is that you need to do for your setting. So inshallah, we have there's a lot of options available.
To buy like this standard size poster, is it available online to purchase?
Yeah. So this is available right now online. Any customized things, you just have to contact us directly and we'd come up with something. But yeah, so this is available now. This particular size, this artwork, it's inshallah, it's available now. Shipping, we
Come in the canvas as it is.
yeah, it'll come canvas, rolled in a tube. Where did I put the tube? I think it's over. Oh, it's okay, right here. Oh no. Well, it's what we do. We have a custom-made tube for the artwork. It's like an industrial grade. Like if you were to bang it, it wouldn't break. So we ship it worldwide in an industrial tube. So I don't know if. So it's quite strong and sturdy. It's thicker than what you'll find in stores. So it's custom made to be very strong, and we ship it worldwide. DHL, it'll take about 2 days anywhere in the UK, and most of Europe about 2 to 3 days, and then anywhere in the world it's within 1 to 5 days, inshallah. We just have to print it first and then ship it. So the whole thing should get to you in like a week, from beginning to end.
Is it, sorry to ask this, but is it if somebody gets a greasy hand on it?
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, so this is not, because this is you have to, yeah. So this, if you have lots of kids who you're afraid they're going to go around touching it or putting grease on it, then we recommend framing it with the glass. If you need some kind of solution, then inshallah we could work on one to make it so that there won't that grease won't come on it. But by default it doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But like lamination, is it possible to have it with lamination?
No, so not.
Laminated, so as you mentioned,
Yeah.
greasy hand or kids or somebody, so if you touches it,
Yeah.
not.
The post version will be laminated. There's a you could get a clear lacquer on it, and so that is an option we could offer. So if anyone needs something like that, just let us know. If there's enough demand, we'll make a version of it just for that. But I've had this in my house with little kids running around. Just in 1 or 2 spots is there. Like this is, you could wash this. So it's, on the version we have in our house, it's just like 1 or 2 tiny little things, like smudges or stuff that are hardly noticeable.
I was just curious on the design. You mentioned that you left out the information around the side about the Prophet's character.
No.
Is that his character?
It was a mix of things. So there was we had like 50 short hadith on the top. We had things about his character, then people around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then we had names of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We had the farewell sermon.
But other than that, in the whole design process, was there anything that you regret having to take out?
That I regret having to take out.
Like you just wish you could have fit in
Let me see. Was there something that I regret having to take out? So I mean, that was to me. That was so. Alhamdulillah. Yesterday I met with 2 days, Thursday, right? 2 days ago, I met with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, and I asked him like, what does he find is missing in Seerah in the West, and he says it's too much emphasis on these events and like wars and battles, not enough on his character and his teachings. And so I wanted to have more things about the character of the Prophet ﷺ, and more things about his teachings directly. You know, this is what Muslims believe about this and Muslims believe about that. So at one point we were looking at, in the text on the right, we were looking at making like summaries about 10 or 12 different subjects and say, this is what the Prophet taught about this and this and this. We still plan to do all that, but we have to do those as separate artworks because it was just making everything too small. So that is more than anything, not a direct line in any particular event that I really regretted having to take out, but it's just this other aspect of the Prophet ﷺ, which we're hopeful, inshallah, we could do that as a separate artwork or a series of separate artworks, right? Yeah. You're welcome. So any other questions? Yeah. Okay. So we were attending the Virtues Tour with Sheikh Ibrahim, so they went around to 8 different cities. So we do have a discount rate that we've been offering during our trip in the UK. So inshallah, everyone here, it's a significant discount actually to what's online. Then that's just for this week while we this week while we're launching. So if anyone's viewing online, just send a message. We'll help you out, inshallah. Inshallah. Okay. Any other? Yeah. So inshallah, and keep up with our Instagram if you do have Instagram. Just keep up with it, because what we're gonna do, we're gonna post a lot of these things, because there's like 100 different little tiny details that people won't notice. So inshallah, we're gonna post a lot of things about these, because it's the kind of thing people have said. Look, it's kind of thing I could own it for like 2 years, 3 years before I finally noticed one of these details. So we want to have that, so when guests come over to your house, you could actually explain this is this and this is that, and have these kind of things for your kids. We also want to show ideas for activities you can do with your kids. We're going to have a lot of these little things going on, so just if you follow us there, we'll post a lot of things there.
Sorry, is it okay for one final question?
Go ahead.
I have an appreciation for the art as an industry in a sense, and I know that it's always very prone to people who sometimes maliciously try to plagiarize information.
No.
And I just wondered with this kind of artwork, do you suffer some of the similar typical kind of situations where people just try and print it and sell it, via Amazon or something, and
yeah,
as a different size, and it's not necessarily quality or respect from the artist?
No. So I have another company, Irada Arts, and it's focusing on Islamic calligraphy. You like that button? So we've been around since 2011, and it was the first Islamic artwork company that I know that paid royalties to artists. Like, we wanted to create a system where, up until recently, artists, like in the West, is very common. You could be an artist, come up with a design, and then people pay royalties to remake it, for example, as a T-shirt, or to use it in publication or stuff like that. In the Muslim world, they didn't really have that for calligraphers. And so we set up this system where we pay royalties for every single artwork we sell. Unfortunately, over the last 7-8 years, we've seen literally dozens of companies online that are taking other calligraphers' artwork without asking permission. And unfortunately, it's a very common problem in the Muslim community. It's in pretty much, someone I know who's had his calligraphy stolen asked me to look into it, and we found 30 different companies selling his artwork without his permission all over the world. And we're sure we missed some because we didn't check like all the local Amazon websites and all this stuff, but it's a very common and widespread problem in the Muslim world. So people, when they have an idea, they want to do a Muslim company artwork, publish a book, they want to use some calligraphy, they just go Google Bismillah calligraphy, Ayatul Kursi calligraphy, and they just take it. We know one company, they sold like $100,000, $200,000 worth of someone's calligraphy. By the time he contacted them, he told them take it down. They came back a few days later, they were still selling it. He said, I told you take it down. They said, we have someone working on making a replica. So they changed it enough so that it'll be hard to fight them in the court. So these things happen. So it's kind of unavoidable. We have Chinese companies. One of the first things we saw, a Chinese company on Alibaba just taking our artwork. And it's like, it's like, what are you going to do? Go to court in China and fight them? But we have some, alhamdulillah, we have protection on this. But it's just sometimes for especially smaller artists who maybe they're not, a lot of the Muslim world is new to the online, new to West court systems and stuff like that. So a lot of them don't even know what's available to them. And so it's unfortunate. The main thing I would tell people, whenever you're buying any kind of Islamic artwork, don't assume that just because this company, this artwork company is big, or this guy, the owner is fine, she looks like a nice lady. Ask them who was the calligrapher, who is the artist. Ask for her name, and so it could be quite surprising, And then most people say, "Oh yeah, we have permission. It's okay." And once you start asking them exact questions, did you call the calligrapher? Did you ask him? Then they go blank, or they stop responding, or they come up with something. But that's a very good question to ask. Just ask, who is the artist? Who's the actual calligrapher? And if people just did that, that would remove most of the problems. But I'm sure people would try. People will try to make it, replicate it. What can you do? Yeah. No.
Sorry, just one more thing. Yeah, earlier you wanted to show us on the projector. Is that you were going to just explain about this piece?
Yeah. So I was going to go to all these small details because there's a lot of small details that you can't see easily, and the people who are watching it will not see easily unless you. So what we wanted to do is actually zoom in so you can actually see some of these details.
Okay.
But inshallah, we have some of those on Instagram, and we'll post more of those, inshallah.
Okay.
Any more questions? No? All right, Jazakallah khairan for having me over. It was a great honor. And inshallah for dua, Sheikh Muhammad Qazi will give a dua. Yalla. Fatiha.